My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I cradled Ranger's bleeding body. The sound of tires screeching still echoed in my ears. I looked up just in time to see Corinne's SUV speeding away, her brake lights never even flashing. My service dog, my lifeline, lay whimpering in my arms, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The neighbors gathered around us, their faces horrified. In that moment, standing on that blood-stained sidewalk, something inside me hardened like concrete. The woman who ran the HOA like her personal kingdom had just made a catastrophic mistake. She had no idea that what she had done was not just cruel, it was a federal crime, and I was going to make absolutely certain she paid for it. The house at 47 Magnolia Lane was supposed to be my sanctuary. After 15 years of military service and 3 tours overseas, the doctors had been clear: find stability, routine, and peace. The nightmares had been getting worse. The hypervigilance never seemed to fade. The diagnosis came 6 months before my retirement: post-traumatic stress disorder, with recommendations for therapy, medication, and a service animal. That was how Ranger came into my life. A Belgian Malinois with intelligent eyes and unwavering focus. He was not just trained, he was exceptional. When the panic attacks came, he would press his weight against my legs, grounding me back to reality. When the world became too loud, too chaotic, he would guide me to quieter spaces. When my leg injury from an IED flared up, he was there to brace against, steady and strong. The Oakwood Hills neighborhood seemed perfect from the outside. Neat rows of homes with trimmed lawns, a community pool, walking trails. The realtor mentioned there was a homeowners association, but assured me it was reasonable. Just basic standards to maintain property values, she had said. I did not think twice about signing the paperwork. My first week was encouraging. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street brought over homemade empanadas. The Johnsons next door offered to show me where the best local coffee shop was. Their children asked if they could pet Ranger, and I explained how service dogs should not be distracted while working. They nodded with genuine understanding. "That vest looks official," Mr. Johnson said, noticing Ranger's service animal harness. "Military." "Yes," I replied. "He helps with my PTSD and mobility issues." "Thank you for your service," he said simply, without the awkward pity I had grown accustomed to. It was on day 9 that I first encountered Corinne Westfield. I was checking my mailbox when a silver SUV pulled into the driveway of the largest house on the cul-de-sac. The woman who stepped out wore tennis whites despite the cool autumn weather, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that seemed to stretch her features into permanent alertness. She noticed Ranger and me immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she marched across the street, clipboard already in hand. "Excuse me," she called out, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Are you new here?" "Just moved in last week," I replied, extending my hand. "Lieutenant Colonel James Miller, retired." She ignored my hand. "I am Corinne Westfield, president of the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association." Her gaze dropped to Ranger, who stood perfectly at my side, vest clearly identifying him as a service animal. "We have strict pet policies in this community." "Ranger is not a pet," I clarified calmly. "He is a trained service dog." Corinne's lips pressed into a thin line. "That breed is not typically approved for our neighborhood aesthetic. Did you submit the proper pet registration forms to the HOA board?" As I said, Ranger is not a pet. He is a federally protected service animal under the Americans with Disabilities Act. There are no registration requirements for service animals under federal law. Her eyes flashed with something I recognized immediately, the look of someone who believed rules were for others, not for her. "Nevertheless, all animals must be registered with the HOA. I will need documentation of his training, vaccination records, and a formal request for accommodation." "I would be happy to provide vaccination records," I replied, my military training keeping my voice level despite the rising tension. But the ADA is quite clear that service animals require no special registration or identification. This is a private community with its own rules, Karen snapped. I suggest you familiarize yourself with our bylaws. She thrust a thick binder into my hands. Section 12, paragraph 4 covers pet regulations. As she turned to leave, she added over her shoulder, and keep that animal off the community lawns. We just reseeded. I watched her walk away, a familiar weight settling in my chest, the one that preceded anxiety attacks. Ranger immediately pressed against my leg, his training kicking in. I placed my hand on his head, grateful for his steady presence. That night, as I reviewed the HOA bylaws, I highlighted the sections that conflicted with federal law. I had faced enemy fire, desert sandstorms, and the chaos of combat. I could certainly handle one power-hungry HOA president. What I did not realize then was that Karen Westfield did not simply bend rules. She broke people who stood in her way. And she had just found her newest target. The first formal violation notice appeared on my door 3 days later. Violation: unauthorized animal presence on community property. It cited Section 12 of the HOA bylaws and included a blurry photograph of Ranger and me walking along the community path. I responded with a polite but firm letter explaining federal ADA protections, including printed legal references. The next day, I found it returned to my mailbox with insufficient stamped across it in bold red letters. The second notice came a week later. Violation: animal waste and lawn damage. This was absurd. I always carried bags and immediately cleaned up after Ranger. Moreover, he was trained to relieve himself only in designated areas. I had been meticulous about this, knowing that one misstep would give Karen ammunition. Then the complaints escalated. A notice claiming Ranger had aggressively barked at children appeared, though he had done no such thing. His training was impeccable. He remained focused on me at all times. Next came allegations that he was defacing community property by walking on the grass. Finally, a noise complaint when Ranger had barked once, just once, when I woke from a particularly violent nightmare at 2 a.m. The neighbors began to take sides. Some, like the Johnsons and Mrs. Rodriguez, would make a point of greeting Ranger and me warmly. Others began to avoid eye contact, clearly not wanting to get on Karen's bad side. She has been doing this for years, Mrs. Rodriguez confided one evening. Last summer, she forced the Williams family to remove their basketball hoop because it was 3 inches taller than regulations permitted. The month before that, she fined the elderly Mr. Peterson for having wildflowers instead of approved landscaping. Has nobody ever challenged her? I asked. People try, she sighed, but she has 3 friends on the 5-person board. They always vote with her. The tensions escalated when I found a note taped directly to my front door. Your animal is causing distress to community members. Remove it or face significant financial penalties and potential legal action. That was crossing a line. I gathered my documentation, Ranger's certification, my disability paperwork, and printouts of the relevant ADA statutes, and requested a meeting with the full HOA board. Karen looked furious when I arrived at the community center with a folder of materials. This is a waste of the board's time, she declared before I could even speak. We have procedures. And I have federal law on my side, I replied evenly. Ranger is a service animal, not a pet, and is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I distributed copies of the ADA guidelines to each board member. This federal law supersedes any HOA regulation. Service animals are specifically permitted in all areas where the public is allowed to go. 2 board members looked uncomfortable. One, a retired teacher named Helen, actually studied the documents. He does seem to make a compelling case, Karen, she ventured. Karen's face flushed red. The bylaws clearly state. Federal law supersedes HOA bylaws, I interrupted firmly. That is not debatable. We will take it under advisement, Karen replied through clenched teeth. The board will notify you of our decision. 3 days later, the response came. Request DENIAD, insufficient documentation of medical necessity. This was not just incorrect, it was illegal. I contacted a veterans advocacy group who referred me to an attorney specializing in ADA compliance. He confirmed what I already knew. Karen and the HOA were in violation of federal law. Send one more formal notice, he advised. Reference our conversation and my contact information. Include the specific federal statutes they are violating and the potential penalties. I did exactly that. The response was immediate. Karen appeared at my door that very evening, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. You are threatening legal action against the board, she demanded. I am simply informing the board of its legal obligations, I replied calmly. This neighborhood functioned perfectly well before you arrived, she hissed. We do not need your kind here. My kind? I asked, feeling Ranger press against my leg as my heart rate increased. Military or not, you cannot simply ignore our community standards, she snapped. You will comply or you will face consequences. As she stalked back to her SUV, I noticed her glancing at Ranger with such naked hostility that it sent a chill through me. Something in her eyes went beyond typical neighborhood disputes or power trips. There was a dangerous edge there, something personal and volatile. That night, I installed a small security camera on my front porch. Something told me Karen Westfield was not someone who gave up easily. What I did not know then was just how far she was willing to go. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp. Despite the ongoing tension with Karen, I was determined to maintain my routine. Structure and consistency were vital for my recovery. My doctors had emphasized that repeatedly. So at precisely 8:30 a.m., Ranger and I set out for our morning walk. We followed our usual route through the neighborhood, passing the community clubhouse with its recently renovated pool area. Ranger walked precisely at my left side, his service vest bright against his dark fur. A few neighbors waved from their yards. Mrs. Rodriguez called out a cheerful greeting. We had just passed the clubhouse when I heard the engine, a vehicle accelerating too quickly for a residential area. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the silver SUV, Karen's vehicle, rounding the corner. She was driving fast, much too fast for the quiet neighborhood streets. I moved Ranger and myself closer to the edge of the sidewalk, a precautionary measure. The SUV continued to approach, and something in my combat-trained instincts flared in warning. The vehicle was not slowing. If anything, it seemed to be drifting toward the curb. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but in my memory, it plays out in agonizing slow motion. The SUV veered slightly toward the sidewalk. I tugged Ranger's lead to pull him even closer to me, but instead of correcting her course, Karen accelerated. The front bumper of her vehicle clipped Ranger's back quarter as he tried to move away. The impact made a sound I will never forget, a dull thud followed by Ranger's sharp yelp of pain. The force spun him around and sent him tumbling onto the grass. I dropped to my knees beside him immediately, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Ranger was conscious but clearly injured. He whimpered as I gently examined him, finding blood on his back leg. Looking up, I saw Karen's SUV had slowed momentarily. Through the driver's window, our eyes met. There was no shock on her face, no horrified realization. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw satisfaction in her expression before she drove away, accelerating down the street. Oh my God! Mrs. Rodriguez was running toward us, phone already in hand. Did she hit him? Did she hit Ranger? Call the emergency vet on Oak Street, I instructed, my military training taking over as I carefully lifted Ranger's 80-pound body. Tell them we are coming now. The next hours passed in a blur of urgent activity. X-rays confirmed a fracture in Ranger's rear leg, along with severe bruising along his hip. The veterinarian was direct but reassuring. "Clean break," she explained, showing me the images. "No joint involvement. He will need a cast and rest, but with proper care he should make a full recovery." "How long?" I asked, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. 8 weeks minimum in the cast, then physical therapy. He is young and healthy, that works in his favor. As they prepared Ranger for his cast, I stepped outside and made 2 calls. The first was to the police, reporting a hit-and-run involving a service animal. The second was to my ADA attorney. By the time I brought Ranger home, sedated, leg in a cast, and clearly confused by the day's events, there was already a police cruiser parked in front of my house. Officer Ramirez took my statement methodically, his expression growing more serious as I detailed the events. "You are certain the driver saw your dog and made no attempt to stop?" "Absolutely certain," I confirmed. "She made eye contact with me after the impact, then drove away." "And the dog was clearly marked as a service animal?" "Yes, his vest is bright blue with service animal clearly visible on both sides." Officer Ramirez nodded, making notes. "This is more serious than a typical hit-and-run. Service animals have special federal protections." "I am aware," I replied. "That is why I have also contacted my attorney." That night, as Ranger slept fitfully beside my bed, his normally alert ears drooping with pain medication, I felt something shift inside me. The anxiety and hypervigilance that had plagued me since my return from combat crystallized into something harder, more focused. Karen had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She had intentionally harmed the one being who had helped me rebuild my shattered life. This was no longer about HOA bylaws or neighborhood politics. This was about justice, and I was going to make sure Karen Westfield faced the full consequences of her actions. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers by the following morning. News traveled fast in Oakwood Hills. As I carefully helped Ranger outside for his necessary breaks, neighbors stopped to express concern and outrage. Most seemed genuinely horrified by what had happened. Karen, however, was already controlling the narrative. By afternoon, I heard from Mrs. Rodriguez that Karen was telling a very different story at an emergency HOA meeting. "She is claiming Ranger ran into the street," Mrs. Rodriguez reported, indignation clear in her voice. "She says you did not have proper control of him and that she barely grazed him when he darted in front of her car." "That is completely false," I replied. "Ranger never left the sidewalk. He never breaks position unless commanded." "I know that," she assured me. "Many of us do, but Karen is persuasive, and people are afraid of crossing her." The official HOA response arrived the next day, hand-delivered by a clearly uncomfortable board member named Tom. The letter was cold and bureaucratic. "The board has determined that the incident occurring on Saturday, March 12th, constitutes a personal matter between 2 residents and falls outside HOA jurisdiction. No further action will be taken by the board at this time." "This is their response to a hit-and-run?" I asked, not bothering to hide my disbelief. Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, for what it is worth, not all of us agree with this, but Karen has significant influence." "Influence should not trump the law," I replied. He nodded weakly before retreating to his car. That afternoon, Karen herself made an appearance at the neighborhood coffee shop where I had stopped to pick up a drink. She entered with 2 other board members, spotted me, and rather than avoiding confrontation, she walked directly to my table. "I understand you have been spreading vicious rumors about me," she said loudly enough for other patrons to hear. "I have made a factual police report about a hit-and-run incident involving my service animal," I replied evenly. "Your dog ran into the street," she countered. "I barely touched him. If anything, you should be cited for not controlling your animal properly." "Ranger never left the sidewalk. He was in proper service position when you swerved toward us." Her eyes narrowed. You cannot prove that, and if you continue with these defamatory statements, I will have no choice but to pursue legal action against you. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I have lived in this community for 15 years. I have connections with the local judge, the police chief, and half the business owners in town. Who do you think they will believe? As she straightened up, she added loudly, I suggest you correct your story before you find yourself in serious trouble. The threat was unmistakable. Corinne clearly believed her position and connections made her untouchable. I remained silent as she strutted away, the two board members following in her wake like obedient shadows. That evening, I requested the security camera footage from the clubhouse, which would have had a clear view of the incident. The request was denied the very next morning with a terse note. Security footage is for official HOA business only. I contacted Officer Ramirez about obtaining a police request for the footage. He agreed to pursue it, but warned me that without a formal subpoena, the HOA could legally refuse. This is getting more complicated, my ADA attorney, David Greenberg, said when I updated him. But also potentially more serious. Intentionally harming a service animal is not just animal cruelty. It is a federal offense under the Americans with Disabilities Act. She claims Ranger ran into the street, I told him. Do you have any witnesses? Any evidence contradicting her version? The clubhouse has security cameras that would have captured everything, but the HOA is blocking access. That could constitute obstruction, David noted, his voice taking on a harder edge. Let me make some calls. This just went from an HOA dispute to a potential federal civil rights case. Later that week, Corinne escalated her campaign. An anonymous flyer appeared in mailboxes throughout the neighborhood. Dangerous animal warning. Residents should be aware that an aggressive dog has been involved in a recent traffic incident. Please keep children away and report any concerning behavior to the HOA immediately. The flyer did not name me or Ranger explicitly, but the implication was unmistakable. Some neighbors began crossing the street when they saw us approaching. Others would hurry their children inside. The isolation was precisely what Corinne wanted, to make me feel unwelcome, to pressure me into leaving. What she did not understand was that I had endured far worse than neighborhood politics. I had survived combat zones, had rebuilt my life after trauma that would have broken many. Her tactics were transparent and ultimately would prove to be her undoing. The first crack in her armor appeared unexpectedly. A young woman named Sarah Jenkins knocked on my door one evening. I recognized her as the college student who lived in the apartment above the community garage. I saw what happened, she said without preamble, with your dog. I was walking back from the gym and saw everything. My heart raced. You witnessed the incident. She nodded. Corinne definitely swerved toward the sidewalk. Your dog never left your side. I wanted to come forward sooner, but she hesitated. Corinne controls whether my month-to-month lease gets renewed. I cannot afford to lose my housing in the middle of the semester. I understand your hesitation, I assured her. Would you be willing to make a statement to the police if it could be kept confidential until necessary? Yes, she said firmly. What she did was wrong. With Sarah's testimony and David's legal pressure mounting, I began to see a path forward. Corinne might think herself untouchable, but she was about to learn that federal law reached further than HOA power ever could. 3 days after Sarah's visit, I found a plain manila envelope in my mailbox. No return address, no note. Inside was a USB drive and nothing else. Cautious by nature and training, I scanned it for viruses before connecting it to my computer. What I saw made my breath catch. It was security footage, crystal clear and from an ideal angle. The timestamp showed 8:43 a.m. on the day of the incident. The footage showed the sidewalk alongside the clubhouse, Ranger and me walking calmly, his position perfect as always. Then Corinne's silver SUV entered the frame. The video confirmed everything. Not only had Ranger never left the sidewalk, but Corinne's vehicle clearly accelerated and veered toward us. The impact was visible, as was Ranger's fall. Most damning of all, the footage clearly showed Corinne looking directly at us after the impact before driving away without stopping. I immediately made 3 copies, one for my attorney, one for the police, and one as a backup. Then I called Officer Ramirez. "I have video evidence of the incident," I told him. "Anonymously provided, but clearly authentic clubhouse security footage." "This changes things," he said after reviewing the video at my home. "This is no longer a disputed incident. This shows clear intent and leaving the scene of an accident." "And it involves a service animal," I added. "Exactly. I am going to forward this to our department legal counsel and likely to the district attorney's office. This could potentially involve federal charges." Within 24 hours, the legal machinery began to move with surprising speed. My attorney forwarded the video to his contacts at the U.S. Attorney's Office, who specialized in ADA enforcement. Officer Ramirez submitted his report along with the video evidence to his superiors, who quickly escalated it. The neighborhood grapevine carried news of these developments to Corinne quickly. Her response was immediate and aggressive. A cease and desist letter arrived from her personal attorney, threatening legal action for defamation and evidence tampering. "The video has clearly been edited to create a false impression," the letter claimed. "Our client categorically denies any intentional action and will pursue maximum damages for this malicious attempt to damage her reputation." My attorney's response was succinct. "The video evidence speaks for itself and has been authenticated by law enforcement. Your client would be well advised to seek criminal defense counsel rather than pursuing meritless civil claims." The balance of power had shifted dramatically. Neighbors who had been avoiding me began to stop by to express support. Several shared their own stories of intimidation by Corinne over the years, fines for minor infractions, threats of liens, personal vendettas carried out through HOA policy. "She once had my rose bushes removed while I was on vacation," Mrs. Johnson revealed. "Claimed they violated the landscaping code, though they had been there for 5 years. It was because I questioned her decision to raise the pool maintenance fees." The HOA board called an emergency session, this time without notifying Corinne. Helen, the retired teacher, came by afterward to update me. "We voted to suspend Corinne from the board pending investigation," she informed me. "Tom brought forward evidence that she has been selectively enforcing regulations for years. The financial audit we requested showed some irregularities as well." "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. "Unexplained expenditures, contracts awarded to companies owned by her brother-in-law, nothing definitive yet but concerning patterns." The community's unified front against Corinne grew stronger when the local newspaper ran a story. "HOA president under investigation. Hit-and-run incident involving veteran's service dog raises federal questions." The article included quotes from ADA specialists and veterans advocates, highlighting the serious nature of the offense. By the time the reporter contacted Corinne for comment, the damage to her reputation was already substantial. Her response, quoted in the article, only made things worse. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a disgruntled resident who refuses to comply with community standards. The entire matter has been grossly exaggerated." The final blow came during a scheduled HOA meeting the following week. Corinne arrived, clearly expecting to reassert her authority despite her suspension. She was in the middle of arguing with the interim board chair when 2 police officers entered the community center. "Corinne Westfield?" one officer asked, though it was clear he already knew who she was. "Yes, what is this about?" she demanded. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of animal cruelty, leaving the scene of an accident, and interference with a service animal in violation of federal disability law. The room fell silent as the officer read her rights. Karen's face drained of color, her usual confidence evaporating as the handcuffs clicked closed around her wrists. "This is a mistake," she kept repeating as they let her out. "Do you know who I am? This cannot be happening." But it was happening. Karen's carefully constructed kingdom was crumbling, brick by brick. As I watched from across the room, I felt no jubilation, no sense of victory, only the quiet satisfaction that justice was finally being served. Later that evening, as I gently checked Ranger's healing leg, I reflected on how quickly things had changed. The silence of my phone was interrupted by a text from my attorney. "U.S. Attorney's Office is taking the case. Federal charges forthcoming. This just went national." The legal process accelerated with surprising speed once the U.S. Attorney's Office became involved. What had begun as a neighborhood dispute had transformed into a significant federal case that drew attention from disability rights advocates and veterans groups across the country. Karen was formally charged under multiple federal statutes, the most serious being intentional interference with a service animal under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The charges carried potential penalties of up to 3 years in federal prison and substantial fines. Additional state charges included animal cruelty, leaving the scene of an accident, and filing a false police report. The preliminary hearing was covered by local media, but the story quickly went national when several veterans organizations released statements condemning the attack and praising the prosecution. "Attacks on service animals are attacks on the disabled Americans who depend on them," read one statement. "This case represents an important stand for disability rights and proper enforcement of ADA protections." Karen's silver SUV was impounded as evidence, forensic specialists documenting the minor damage to the front bumper that matched Ranger's injuries. More damaging still was the discovery of text messages on Karen's phone, sent to another board member just hours before the incident. "Going to take care of our dog problem once and for all. He will get the message." As a condition of her bail, Karen was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation and prohibited from returning to the neighborhood. The evaluation results were sealed by the court, but her attorney's subsequent motion for a mental health diversion program suggested the findings were not in her favor. The HOA board, now operating under new leadership, issued a formal statement distancing themselves from Karen's actions. The Oakwood Hills HOA wishes to express its profound regret for the incident involving Mr. Miller's service animal. The actions of the former board president do not reflect the values of our community, and we are cooperating fully with authorities. We are also undertaking a comprehensive review of all HOA policies to ensure full compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and other federal regulations. My attorney explained the significance of the federal involvement during one of our preparation meetings. "The Justice Department is using this case to send a message," David explained. "Service animal protections have been on the books for years, but enforcement has been inconsistent. Your case has all the elements they need for a landmark prosecution: clear evidence, a sympathetic victim, and egregious conduct by the perpetrator." "I never wanted to become a test case," I admitted. "Few ever do," he replied. "But your willingness to stand up has already had impact. 3 other cases involving service animal interference have been reopened since your story broke." Ranger's recovery progressed steadily through these legal developments. The cast came off after 8 weeks, replaced by a supportive brace. His physical therapy sessions showed promising results, though he still favored his uninjured leg when tired. The veterinarian remained optimistic about a full recovery. "He is young, strong, and has excellent muscle tone," she assured me during a follow-up visit. "Most importantly, his spirit has not been broken. Some service dogs become fearful after traumatic incidents, but Ranger still shows confidence